Namaskar. Welcome to this very special dialogue. Today, the Congress alleged that Mrs. Madhabi Puri Buch, the chairperson of SEBI, had drawn a salary of 16.80 crores, 16.8 crores from ICICI Bank while she was the member of SEBI and now after 2022 the chairperson of SEBI. They also claim that she got another 22,41,000 from ICICI Prudential between 2017 and 2024. Again, the period when she was member and then later on when she became after 21 when she became the chairperson of after 22, my apologies, when she became the chairperson of SEBI. Now, there has been a lot of allegations, lot of questions raised, lot of people have asked for investigation, for justification as to how somebody who once upon a time had some links, which is what Hindenburg alleges, that she had some kind of linkage with Adani and Adani funds because she had invested in a company which incidentally, allegedly had invested in Adani funds and so on and so forth. So a lot of questions has been raised. Now the point that I want to know is if somebody had even some kind of a linkage with a company that has always been in the news, for whatever reason, has always been in the news in India since quite some time, why would that person be put as the chairperson of the biggest regulatory body of India? A body that controls the stock market, the body that controls the Indian public offerings in India. Why would you put somebody as a Security Exchange Board chairperson? Which is a question I wanted to understand, which is something I wanted to understand. So I have Dr. Arun Kumar with me today, and I'm going to ask him and figure out what exactly is happening and his views on what the Congress press conference was all about and what the Congress alleged today about Mrs. Madhabi Puri Buch. Let's get right into this. Sir, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a long time since I could get to have a conversation with you, sir. Thank you so much. And you're looking as fresh as always. Sir, I want to start with a very basic question, sir. Sir, why did Supreme Court not allow a CBI investigation on the Hindenburg-Adani case, but insisted that SEBI should be doing it?
You know, this involves financial dealings, right? And especially in relation to the stock market. Because let's look at what Hindenburg was saying. Hindenburg was saying that there's been manipulation of the stock market. There's been, manipulation of the price of the Adani companies. And that's why they were saying that the price-earning ratio was very high. Normally the price-earning ratio of most companies would be in the range of, if they're good companies, in the range of 15 to 25. Currently, because the market is very high, it would be probably higher. But normally that was the range within which it was. But in some of the companies of Adani Group, it was 100, 200, 400. So as far as the stock was concerned, you're getting 1%, 0.5% return. Therefore, the question was, why was the price so high? And if the price was so high, why wasn't the Ministry of Finance or the SEBI, the regulator, why weren't they reacting? Why wasn't the Enforcement Directorate reacting to how come the price was so high? So these were some of the allegations which had to do with the financial sector. And that's why probably, the Supreme Court may have thought that maybe the financial sector regulator, SEBI, should have investigated it because they would have maybe the expertise. Because financial markets are very, very complex. That kinds of interlinkages, and this is one of the allegations that Hindenburg had made earlier in the first report, that there were, related party transactions. Mr. Vinod Adani sitting abroad was investing, and that was not getting counted. Whereas, in the 75% of the holding of the Adani Group in its own company, that probably was exceeded if Vinod Adani's investment is also counted. So that was another problem. then whenever financial markets are involved, then what happens is tax havens come into play, because money is transferred through tax havens. There are 90 tax havens in the world, and you can transfer money from one to the other, and they may look later on as normal transaction. What's coming into the Indian stock market may look like a normal transaction coming from Mauritius or from Dubai or something like that. But who's behind it? That is hard to track, because this money is moved through the process of layering. Layering means the money goes from one tax haven to the other, from one shell company to another shell company. The shell companies are closed, so it becomes difficult to track. So that's why I think, given all these kind of charges that were there, they probably asked SEBI rather than the CBI, because CBI may not have the expertise to be able to track these financial movements. So SEBI, in some sense, was possibly the better organization to look at it rather than CBI.
Sir, why not the famous Enforcement Directorate? They do it all the time, almost every day, especially when it comes to opposition, of course. But why not Enforcement Directorate?
So they could have also been asked, and maybe they should have been asked. But I think SEBI, because it's to do with the stock market, the accusations were to do with the stock market. So let's concede that maybe, okay, SEBI was the appropriate agency. But the question that arises, which is what now in the second report the Hindenburg have raised, is how come Hindenburg has been given a charge sheet, whereas SEBI is not investigating the Adani companies? That's what they're saying.
Correct. Before that, I want to ask one more question, sir. Sir, this was February 2023 when SEBI was asked to investigate. They were given 2 months, which assumingly it will be, in fact, I'm sorry, it was March 2023. February is when the PIL was raised. March 23 was when SEBI was asked to investigate. They were given 2 months, which is April, May. SEBI should have provided a report in May. Nothing happened. January 2024, again, there was a PIL. Again, Supreme Court insisted that SEBI should be investigating. Sir, the point isn't that, I know that this is a legal question and I'm asking you, but the point is, I just want to know, sir, isn't that contempt of court? And why is the court giving so much latitude to SEBI? We also saw this in the SBI case when it came to electoral bond. They were also given latitude. Sir, I say latitude to the why are these latitudes given?
So, as you know, the Supreme Court had set up a committee. The committee was to be assisted by SEBI. SEBI was supposed to investigate these 23, 24 charges and then, provide the information to that committee. And the committee was to report to the Supreme Court, right? So there was extra time given because SEBI said that they were having difficulties, and therefore the committee could not come to a conclusion on all the charges that were leveled, right? Then, SEBI was given more time by the committee and by the Supreme Court, but by and large, Supreme Court said that there was really nothing. So they actually exonerated more or less the Adani companies because of the other 22 charges which had been investigated there. But you see, even at that time, it was said that the committee that was set up consisted of people from the corporate sector and the world of finance. And they were not going to look at other wider issues. They were only going to look at narrow technical issues. The wider issues were, what were the linkages between the political and the crony capitalism, as it is called, between the political masters and between the companies, and because of which, possibly investigation by SEBI was not taking place. One prime example of that is that when the Hindenburg first report came in January 24th, right, the FPO of Adani was to come on 27th January. So this was done just prior to that, right? And the price of the Adani companies fell drastically. So when the FPO started, the price was already below what the FPO price was. So the question is, why was anybody investing in the FPO? The FPO, because I could go to the market and I could buy the same stock for a cheaper price. And then in the last 2 days, when the retail investors were supposed to invest, the investment was not coming. And therefore, the bigwigs of Indian corporate sector, they invested money and made the FPO successful. But again, the question is that if the price in the market is say 2,700, why would anybody invest at 3,200? Why were these bigwigs investing? So obviously they were under pressure. Some pressure would have been applied on them that they invest so that the FPO is successful. And the very next day, the FPOs cancelled by Adani's. So obviously the agreement would be, today you make my FPO successful, tomorrow I'll return you your money, I will not take the money from you. So there's a lot of manipulation going on. So quite clearly this manipulation had political dimension. It was not just purely technical. So that's why the argument at that time was that the JPC should be set up. The JPC, the political masters did not want to set up because that would have opened up many questions about why is it that if the price earning ratio was so high, why did the SEBI not investigate? Why the ED did not investigate? What were the political connections and so on? So therefore, there's a lot of, problems coming as to when you say, why was SEBI asked? Why did the Supreme Court, delay? Why did they allow, more time to be given? Now, one of the things that the Supreme Court committee said was that there was a law that was changed in 2018. Earlier, you could go behind who were the people who are behind that investor. But in 2018, now it was said that you cannot go behind. So whoever is investing, you cannot go behind them and find out who are the real investors. So that the SEBI had said and the committee had said was a problem. Why SEBI is not able to go behind and find out who are the real investors, right? So that law was changed in 2018. Now, if the JPC had asked, why was this law changed? Then the government would have had to reply. Because in the financial markets, as I said, there's a layering process. So whoever is investing upfront is not necessarily the real owner. That is also the problem which is being pointed out in the SEBI second report. Because Mrs. Buch and Mr. Buch say that they had invested money that they had earned abroad in a company. Now that company also had people who had earlier associated with Adani. They were running the company. There was also investment from Adani. So it's quite possible it was a nested company. That nested company was actually part of a bigger chain, which was investing money on behalf of the Adanis. So these are suspicions that therefore there was a linkage. So even though Mr. Buch has said that this fellow was a very good friend of mine, he was my class fellow, etc. But these things don't count in a financial transactions. What is important is that you may be building linkages with other bigwigs, by doing this transaction, by allowing your money to also be transacted by the same company. So in other words, these suspicions are there. And recently, Venkatesh, who's a RTI activist and so on, he's come out with this thing about the Pinochet, the Chilean dictator who was prosecuted in London because he was in London, and then they found that one of the judges had a link with Amnesty International. And because of that link, they said that he's a colored person. He's got a bias. Now the House of Lords on that basis overturned the judgment, and therefore Pinochet could not be prosecuted. But the point is that, mere suspicion is good enough. If there's even a suspicion, a judge recuses herself or himself. Here, Mrs. Buch had several kinds of linkages that were being pointed out by the Hindenburg and so on. And therefore, she should have definitely recused, and especially when the committee was supposed to be briefed by SEBI, the Supreme Court committee, at that point, she should have revealed that earlier she had some indirect linkages. So maybe, there's no financial irregularity. Even if there's no financial irregularity, this Pinochet principle says that as soon as there's a bias, you have to recuse. If you don't recuse, then that whole process gets, in a sense, vitiated. So in other words, you see, the way the financial markets are and the way secrecy works, nobody reveals the truth. That's why even if there's a hint of some kind of a link, that is important. And that's why SEBI itself demands complete transparency from the financial institutions it monitors. Because so if SEBI is demanding from the financial institutions and the financial players that they be completely transparent, then SEBI chairperson also has to be completely transparent. So even if there's a hint of some kind of a link with the Adani group, and here, as the first report points out, why is the SEBI not investigating? When the price earning ratio is so high, when the money is coming, when the related party transactions are there, all this calls for investigation. That's why a narrow technical committee should not have been set up. A JPC is what should be set up. Even now, it's important that a JPC be set up because even the Hindenburg second report is saying that all this should be investigated. because they're saying these are linkages. We can't go beyond a point to prove the overall point. But once that investigation is done, then they will come up with the truth. So there are two things. One is, as long as there's some kind of linkage, she should have recused herself. Second is that a wider committee needs to go into this entire thing so that the point can be clarified, and only a JPC can actually clarify all the points, not a narrow technical committee. If a second technical committee is set up, even they will not be able to go into various questions that need to be asked.
Sir, as a layperson, all of this sounds so weird, and transparency is the last thing that one can even expect in this case. I mean, right from SEBI given the charge to investigate by the committee, SEBI not providing any report, like you rightly said, investors coming in and investing, and then the issue being cancelled. All of this absolutely from day one has been absolutely opaque, and transparency is the last thing that we can expect. Sir, I want to, before I get into SEBI, which is what we want to discuss today, sir, I want to know that how much credibility do we give Hindenburg? I mean, end of the day, they are also short sellers, aren't they?
See, short selling is not bad. If a company, if say some financial person is actually overvaluing the stock, right? Like in that particular case, they've argued that it's 85% overvalued, right? And that's why the price earning ratio is very high, right? So in that case, a short seller actually comes and corrects the market. So short selling is only when there is a manipulation. And in many cases that Hindenburg has investigated, they found that there are companies that are overvaluing the stock by manipulating the financial markets, and therefore they're only getting the market to the correct value. So that's why when initially the stock market declined and the Adani stocks declined by almost 65-70%, okay, that was coming close to the 85% that they were pointing out was the overvaluation of the Adani stocks, right? So short selling is not bad in itself. Short selling, when it leads to some kind of a speculative activity which actually leads to the stock market decline, that may be bad. By itself, short selling is not bad, because if the short seller is wrong, then his money will be lost, right? Because then the market would go back up and he would lose his money. Short selling by itself is not bad. So Hindenburg, if it is raising certain points, right, even on the basis of the public documents that are available, even if it was the earlier cases where there's some kind of judgment had come and they're pointing to them now, point they're making is that there's something wrong. And what was wrong was quite evident, which public had been talking about. How come the Bombay airport, was acquired by Adani's? How come the cement companies were acquired by Adani's the last minute? How come they were getting all the infrastructure projects and so on? How come, from being the 630th in the rich people's list, they suddenly became, within a short period of time, the second richest person? So these were things that had created a lot of suspicion in the public's mind, right? And not only Hindenburg, 6-7 months before that, some of the banks had also raised this issue that, there's a heavy over leveraging. That means compared to the equity, the debt was very high. And then Adani's had responded to that and said, no, that's not so. And they tried to argue. But a lot of suspicion had been raised even before the Hindenburg report came. So Hindenburg as short sellers are not wrong in putting out that report. And if the stock is overvalued, in making money out of that, they're not doing anything wrong in that. They're only correcting the market. The public which is being maybe taken for a ride, that taking for a ride probably is a less of a ride once the market price corrects. So I think they are doing not a bad thing. They're doing the right thing by raising issues. The question is, why isn't India responding to that? Why isn't the government responding to that? Why isn't the government agencies responding to that? That's what brings us to the question of the crony capitalism. That if there's crony capitalism, then the entire machinery would defend the Adanis, and that's probably what has happened.
Correct. Sir, let us focus on SEBI and the Congress allegations today. Sir, now Congress says that Ms. Madhabi Puri Buch was a whole-time director with SEBI between April 5th to October 4th, 2021. Congress says she became. Congress says no, she became the chairman. My apologies. She became the chairperson of SEBI March 2022. Now, Congress claims that she had all this while she was getting a salary and she was paid up to 16.8 crores of rupees during this time while she was the member of SEBI, and she also received 22 lakhs 41,000 as ESOPs from ICICI Bank, ICICI Prudential. So tell me, how is this possible, and how such blatant violation of law, if this is true, that is?
Yeah, that's right. So I think, that's where Hindenburg has also said these things should be investigated. The charges that they have leveled, about the various investments, etc., etc. So here also, the charges that are being leveled by Congress, hopefully they've got all the documentation right? Yes. And if that is the case, then, this is to be investigated, because earlier the Hindenburg second report, Madhabi Buch and her husband denied all the charges. SEBI also issued statements saying there's nothing wrong that was done, right? So the question is that there are some people who are making certain charges. There are some people who are denying that. So an investigation is required, right? And Hindenburg also said investigation is required. So in this case also, let there be an investigation, but this investigation cannot be by a technical committee. Again, I come back to the point that because a lot of political, pressures are there on various investigative agencies, and to the extent that the CBI has been called the cage parrot by the Supreme Court itself, and at various points of time, Supreme Court and the various courts have said that the official agencies spoil the cases. The way the cases are recorded, the way the cases pay out, you can spoil the case, right? So given all that, it's a political question. It's not just a narrowly technical question. This is where the JPC is important. Now, we have had a history of 3 other JPCs prior to this, right? Those 3 JPCs also did not succeed in really correcting the financial problems, whether it be the time of Harshad Mehta or the Ketan Parekh or the 2G scam, at that time also they could not correct. But a lot of things came out. The public got aware of what's going on, how the manipulations go on, and so on. So in this case also, maybe because the ruling party is always going to dominate in the JPC, therefore they may not allow various things to come out, right? But when the questions are done by the opposition party and the answers come to that, then the public gets to know. So I think it's fair that for transparency's sake, all these things get revealed. So including the current charges, maybe the Congress party has been given some information and some data, and they'll put it out in detail in the public. Mrs. Buch will also have her side of the view, which she'll also put out, and let that be investigated completely, okay, but not by a technical committee. So Hindenburg's charges and the charges on ICICI, which have come out now, and earlier, as you know, some SEBI former directors and members of the SEBI board, they also said that she should have recused herself. She should have recused herself from the Supreme Court committee that was there, SEBI's committee to help the Supreme Court committee. So in other words, even some former SEBI board members have said that a recusal would have been good. And this Pinochet judgment in London clearly makes out, that she should have recused herself, and she didn't recuse herself. That's a problem.
Sir, if you look at it plainly, there was this person who invested in some international bonds, and she invested. This particular bond was investing in Adani, and this was between 2015, and she says by 2017 she had withdrawn from that. She had withdrawn her investments, and in 2022, March 2nd, very ironically, March 2nd, 2022, she was appointed as member of SEBI. And March 2nd, 2023, Supreme Court asks for the investigation. Now, sir, doesn't all of this looks very strange? You have a person in the member, as member of SEBI, who is in some way, directly, indirectly, invested in at least had investment in Adani, and possibly has profited from that investment too, which is what I want to believe, that profited from that investment too. Isn't that reason enough for her to recuse herself and to or possibly to be then appointed the chairperson of the body. Isn't that strange?
So, there are 2, 3 things that we need to be clear. When she was investing in a company, okay, that company was run by somebody who had earlier been working for Adani.
Yes.
Okay? And
Yes.
that company was going to invest in various ways, right? But in that company also, Mr. Vinod Adani was also putting his money in, right? And in these small companies, what happens is, unlike in the big companies, these big players, they can actually tell where you should invest the money. So that's where the suspicion arises that if Mr. Vinod Adani was the big investor there, then he could have directed. So that's why these are called nested companies, these small companies. These are used to funnel money in and out. So they were investing in that small company also. Now, we can't prove that actually that money was, going into Adani companies because that needs to be investigated, right? But the very fact that Mr. Vinod Adani was investing, these people who are running, the friend of the husband, he had earlier worked for Adani company, all that raises suspicion. And in financial markets, it's usually the case that you never get to know the truth completely because the way the nesting is done, the way the linkages are built up, etc. So suspicion is there. And that's why Hindenburg is saying this needs to be investigated fully, right? So that's a fair point. So, but the point is in the financial market, even if you have linkages, those linkages mean that you probably have some kind of a deeper understanding or deeper relationship. So when you get appointed into SEBI, you get appointed to the board of a bank, you get appointed as managing director, a chairperson, there's a lot of cronyism that comes in. These financial sector appointments are not based entirely on that you are very capable or that you're very good at your job, etc., etc. It requires some connectivity also. So that's why you see the chairpersons and managing directors of the banks, they have been manipulated by the political masters because they are appointed by the banking division of the Ministry of Finance, right? And there the political masters have a say. So who gets appointed as chairperson and managing director or the SEBI board of directors, etc., there'll be a political say. Now, if you have been linked to somebody powerful like Adani, that obviously becomes a source of your getting to the political masters who would appoint you, right? So all these are suspicions because this is how the finance world works. You can't prove that Mr. A was connected with B and B was connected with C and therefore C appointed D, right? Because D was very close to A, right? These things, but in the finance world, we know that these things happen. And therefore, recusal is the basic thing. And that's what Pinochet's judgment is. That, if there's a suspicion that you were connected and maybe, you had earned that money abroad, you'd earned that money, but where were you investing? And why were you investing in that? Was it to build a linkage with the Adani group so that you could benefit out of it later on? And then you got appointed in the SEBI board, and then from SEBI board, you become the SEBI chairperson. First time somebody who was not in the public sector, who was a private sector member got appointed, and a private sector member would invariably have had links in the financial world with various companies, etc. So there could be, conflict of interest. So therefore, these are the kind of issues that will come up, and only a JPC can sort it out. Technical committee will not sort it out because they cannot work out the link between A and B, B and C, C and D, etc. These are political questions that will crop up, which will have to be investigated in detail. A SEBI appointed committee would only look at very minor little connections and then say there's nothing in it, because that 2018 law is there, which prevents you from going further behind who's the real owner of those funds, etc. So therefore, it's a political question that has come up.
Correct. And I intend to. The reason I'm asking this question, sir, is assuming everything is right, everything, and the investment happened. This investment, the person when Miss Buch was investing the money, she didn't know where the money is going to go. Chalo, let us assume that also. Let us assume everything is fair. But the fact is, there was a connection between Vinod Adani and this particular company. That itself is reason enough. For her to be, first of all, the government should be, or the body that, and in this case, I presume it is the Prime Minister's office that appoints the chairman of SEBI, the chairperson of SEBI, my apologies. Isn't that obvious that the Prime Minister's office should be checking as to is there any kind of linkage. Especially, see, Adani is not something that happened today or yesterday. Adani issue has been actually been there since 2014, since this government took over. So it is not that it is like something happened just yesterday. So wouldn't the Prime Minister's office be like what Congress also alleges? The Prime Minister's office should be mindful of the fact that who you are appointing and the person has had some connection with Adani in some form. Isn't that obvious, sir?
So you're absolutely right, and that's where cronyism comes in appointment on financial sector boards or chairpersons or managing directors, etc. Right? But it is always hard to prove because you don't have a direct evidence. But in this case, because there's been suspicion that there have been connections of Mr. Adani with the top leadership of the country, right? And therefore, the PMO would also be interested in appointing somebody who would be kind to the Adani group, etc. So that's why, only a political thing. Otherwise, if you only ask for technical thing, then technically they would say we did all the finding and we found nothing wrong. But here, one of the things that Mrs. Buch is saying that in 2017, when this friend of Mr. Buch had left the company, then we had disinvested because we, etc. But that's not the point. Point is, once you establish a link, that link becomes permanent. So even if you withdrawn your money and you invested it somewhere else, that link has been established. And where you're investing the money, we don't know. That could still be in some form, linked to the Adani group. So we don't know. That's why investigation is very important. And Hindenburg, right at the end in the conclusion, has said these need to be investigated. So they are putting out some linkages, saying that these linkages, whether to the Blackstone, whether to the company that was investigated by Financial Times, to the Agora company, all these 3-4 things they put out. And they said, if we investigate this, we'll find out what the linkages were. And why is it that SEBI was not investigating Adani, but was issuing a show cause notice to Hindenburg? Okay.
Correct.
So investigation, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. My question was, before I get into my last bit of my interview, I wanted to ask you about this Agora group. Sir, how fair is it from a model perspective that, you have a company, you run a company, which is a consultancy firm. Sir, consultancy firm I'm re-emphasizing is because consultancy firm works on a person's capability. It is not about a manufacturing company where you machines manufacture and you are just investing in it. Consultancy is your brain, which is what you invest in. So a consultancy firm, and when you are supposed to be appointed as the chairperson, you hand over that consultancy firm to your husband. Is that really correct, sir? Because end of the day, are you handing over the company or is that company, just the name is being transferred? I'm purely asking you from a moral perspective. Ideally, I would have either sold that company or I would have handed it over to a trust where I walk out of that and the trust handles it. Then I can understand, I have kept a distance between the consultancy and myself. Here, in this case, handed over to the husband. How fair is that, sir?
No, so that also is not fair. And, again, the Pinochet judgment, which Venkatesh has so capably brought out, there the wife was directly involved in the Amnesty International. The husband was also involved. But the fact is that, because of the linkage with the wife and the wife was more actively involved, therefore the husband should have recused. That is what the thing is. So if any family member of yours, a close family member of yours is involved in some company, then, you can't say you're at arm's length. You had to put it to a blind trust, which, none of your family members were there. And secondly, a lot of consultancy is also based on connections. It's not simply your mind. It's based on who you have connections with, who's going to give you the consultancy. So these consultancies are not really objective. So just like the appointment as SEBI chairperson or the chairperson of a bank, a public sector bank, is not just objective. It is linked to who you have connections with. So therefore, even this Agora thing and consultancy continuing, people could be seeking favors from you by giving you consultancy, right? So you may give a consultancy to Agora, right, which will give income to XYZ, right? And that XYZ will then favor you, okay? So therefore, you had to have a blind trust or completely get out of it, So I think, in financial world, these interrelationships are very important. They may be hidden, and that's why there's suspicion. And that's why, she should have recused herself from all this.
Sir, my last part, and this is slightly deviating, but I still want to ask you this question, sir. Sir, Chanda Kochar, Videocon, ICICI was involved. She was the chairperson of ICICI. Now again, ICICI is involved. The 16.8 crores which Congress seems to have alleges has come from ICICI, incidentally. So my question is, what does that say about ICICI Bank? What does that say about ICICI Bank?
So ICICI Bank is a private bank, right? A private bank will have a private management. The private management would have private interests, and these private interests would be required to be served, by the chairperson and so on. Now it all depends on how objective you are, how fair you are, and that is where the problem is, that ICICI Bank obviously is not being fair in terms of its policies, because its board is maybe tolerating certain kind of interlinkages and relationships. And the private banks are also subject to government pressures, because even though they're private and privately run and private profit, but government in India has a lot of linkages with them. They can actually make you or mar you, through the various policy regulations and so on. We have seen that, say, in the case of telecom sector, there were three companies, suddenly the Jio came and the whole scenario changed, So you can give favors, to private sector to make somebody better than somebody else. You can allow companies to be acquired, like in the case of, the expansion of Adani Group, right? They acquired a lot of companies. It's not that they've developed technology. It's not that their expansion has been because they've developed new technologies and on the basis of which they've captured the market. They've captured the market because they've been allowed, to enter into various sectors, whether it be ports or airports or so on, or whether it be cement companies acquired, airports acquired, etc., etc. So in India, the link between the private sector and the public sector, the government, is quite strong. And that, is what the problem of cronyism is. So ICICI Bank would also have been subject to various kind of cronyism. So depending on who's your favorite at a given point of time of the powers that be, you may adjust them. And while adjusting them, you also make money yourself, or you come closer to the powers that be. So these interlinkages at top are very, very important in the Indian context. And I think it's true also of many other countries. At one point, I remember in Japan, the prime ministers had to resign in the 90s because it was called Japan Incorporated. That the Japan government was close to the businesses there, and therefore there was corruption. Similarly, in South Korea, the president had to resign in the 1990s because the president was supposed to be close to the conglomerates, right? So in capitalism, in big capitalism, the linkages between the top and the big businessmen are very strong. And that's where I think these cronyism comes in. Even in the US, if you look at Enron, for instance, Enron came, when Enron was coming to India, Henry Kissinger and the Secretary Energy and Secretary Defense, they all came to India to pressurize India to allow Enron. And then Enron got caught in all the corruption. And then luckily for us, it collapsed. Otherwise, our Maharashtra's budget and the central budget both would have been in trouble. This happened in the 90s, So all these kind of manipulations that go on at the top, I think, are part of capitalism. It's not that they're only a sort of a exception. These are not exceptions. These are part of the way the one. So if ICICI Bank has got into trouble earlier with one company and now vis-a-vis another person, then I think it's part of the way that capitalism works, in the way the relationship between the politics and the way the big business, the way the linkages are. Those are what's are playing out.
Sir, my last question to you before we end the show, sir. Do you think Harshad Mehta would have had a different status and different stature and different fate had he been alive today, or had he been done the entire scam in today's India?
See, even at that time, Harshad Mehta had contacts. If you go back to the Harshad Mehta affair, he claimed that he had given 1 crore in a bag, to the prime minister, and he had done a TV show in which he tried to pack 1 crore into a big suitcase and so on. But go back, to 1991. When the stock market was rising, the Indian economy was actually tanking at that point of time. I wrote an article in October 1991 when the Indian economy is tanking, saying how come the stock markets are rising when the rate of growth is falling? Okay. And, Manmohan Singh was the finance minister. He was asked this question in parliament, and he said, I will not lose sleep over the stock market. That enabled Harshad Mehta to speculate further, because the government has said, the clear hint was that we are not going to intervene in the rise of the stock market, because the rise of the stock market was seen as the success of the policy, right? Then when the budget came on February 28, 1992, that was the day the income tax was conducting a raid on Harshad Mehta. So when the budget was being presented, the stock market was tanking, okay? And that raid was stopped so that the stock market doesn't go down further. When on April 6, 1992, the stock market collapsed, okay? That is when it was found that the raid had been stopped, and that's why the speculation had continued. Then, a few days before the budget was to be presented, Harshad Mehta had been taken to the Ministry of Finance, which is not done. For 10 days before the budget is presented, people are not allowed to go. But he went and met, along with Krishnamurti, the person who was the BHEL chairperson or something like that. And Krishnamurti was prosecuted later on, okay? But Harshad Mehta was not. And, at that time, apparently, he was promised that wealth tax would be removed from shares. Now, that is a big signal for speculation, because if the wealth tax is removed, then the stock market will rise, okay? So all these manipulations go on. It's not as if they're going on now. These manipulations have been going on for quite some time, right? So in other words, this cronyism, has been there. And if you go back even further, go to the early 80s, there was this thing where, Swaraj Paul was trying to take over DCM and escorts, right? And there was a tussle between apparently Rajiv Gandhi and Indira Gandhi. Rajiv Gandhi was on one side and Indira Gandhi was on the other, So at that time, they were not allowed to take over, even though the holding of Shriram Group and the Escort Group in their own company was 0.001%. It was negligible holding, but it's all public sector holding, public sector financial institutions, etc. that were holding. So unless they agreed for takeover, it would not have happened. And what was Swaraj Paul saying? He was saying that these companies are declaring hardly 6-7% in dividend. I will take them over and I'll declare 25%, because manipulation is going on. Okay. So linkages between the top and the political bosses and the big business, they have been there all along. Okay. Now, the point is that you can have, one group favored over everybody else. That's what happened now. Just 2-3 groups are being favored, whereas earlier it was probably much more broad-based. So I think the change that has come in the last 10 years is that 1 or 2 or 3 groups are being heavily favored.
Correct.
So Ultratech was not allowed to take over the 2 cement companies, and those 2 cement companies went, and Ultratech is Birla. Okay, so even Birla was not favored, So the favor is being done very narrowly now, whereas earlier I think it was much more broad-based. So that's the new change that has come.
So the new change in crony capitalism is that earlier on you had a lot of wealth creators who were favored, and now you have 2 or whatever, 1 or 2 wealth creators.
Maybe 3 or so. And therefore, you see, many of the businessmen have got scared. They are leaving the country, the high net worth individuals. So between 2014 and 2019, 23,000 high net worth individuals left India. In 2019, another 7,500 left. In 2022, again 7,000 left. So high net worth individuals are probably worried that their profitable businesses could be taken over by somebody. So this crony capitalism is spoiling the investment climate in the country. And that's why the private investment is not going up. Okay. The Ministry of Finance keeps saying that, the private sector has to invest more, public sector is investing more, but the private sector is not coming forward. But if you create this kind of climate of fear, then private investment will be, lagging behind.
Sir, I thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for the time you give and the wisdom that you table in this conversation. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks. All the best.
Stay ahead with our cutting-edge news app. Instantly access the latest shorts in just 1 minute and breaking news in just 50 words. Download now for a smarter, faster news experience.